11:21. I'm calling to order this meeting. This is an additional meeting of the Council of the District of Columbia. I'm Phil Mendelson, Chairman of the Council. Today is Tuesday, June 13th, 2023. The time is 11:22 in the morning. This meeting is being held in room 500, the council chambers of the John A. Wilson Building. This is the 10th legislative meeting of council period 25. This meeting is being what we call hybrid, in that there are several members who are participating virtually. I want to say one order of business that's not technically correct, and that is dealing with the final reading on the Budget Support Act. And the reason why it's not technically correct is because not only do we have the Budget Support Act, but we also have the emergency version of the bill as well. That's so that it can be effective right away as soon as the mayor signs it. We always begin our legislative meetings with a moment of silence. If we could have silence in the chamber, as well as those who are participating virtually. Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Allen.
Here.
Councilmember Bonds. Here. Councilmember Freeman.
Here.
Councilmember Gray.
Here.
Councilmember Henderson.
Here.
Councilmember Lewis George.
Here.
Councilmember McDuffie.
Here.
Chairman Mendelson.
Present.
Councilmember Nadell.
Here.
Councilmember Parker.
Here.
Councilmember Pinto. Councilmember Pinto. Councilmember Robert White.
Present.
Councilmember Trayon White. Councilmember Trayon White. Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We have only a non-consent agenda, and the first item is final reading and vote on Bill 25-202, entitled the Fiscal Year 2024 Budget Support Act of 2023. This bill was approved at first reading on May 16th. And I appreciate the members' patience that rather than our bringing it up last week, that we took additional time to perfect amendments that had been suggested by a number of members. And all that's reflected in the amendment nature of a substitute that I circulated yesterday morning. I circulated it together with a 6-page memo that explained most of the changes that are in the amendment nature of a substitute compared to the bill as adopted on first reading. I didn't really, for today, highlight the significant changes between the first reading, the engrossed version, and the amendment nature of a substitute. Let me just say that besides the memo, that what we tried to do was to get comments from members, make some refinements based on comments from members. There are some additional subtitles that were not in the first reading. I'm thinking, for example, the proposal from Councilmember Lewis George with regard to leftover money in the DCPS budget that will be spent first before the FY24 advance into FY23. That's just one example of a new subtitle. Although that was adopted, language similar to that was adopted as part of the Local Budget Act in our vote last week. I'm going to move the amendment nature of a substitute, and rather than having a vote on it at this time, I'm going to entertain amendments to the amendment nature of a substitute. The first amendment would be what I circulated yesterday, which concerns the Housing Authority Rehabilitation and Maintenance Fund, which is actually reflected in the capital budget, and therefore the amendment corrects where the funds will be deposited beginning in FY 2028. Instead of being in an operating fund, it will be in a capital project where they're already budgeted as part of the capital improvements plan. The amendment was circulated yesterday. I move the amendment. Is there discussion on the amendment? By a voice vote, all those in favor of the amendment say aye.
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 Are there any no votes?
Chairman, please go, Mr. President.
Are you voting present on the amendment or are you
Yeah.
being,
Trying to catch up to where we are.
okay? The amendment is approved unanimously with Councilmember Trayon White being recorded as present. Madam Secretary, as I sit here on the dais, I see both council members Pinto and Trayon White present.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the amendment is, that amendment is approved unanimously. The next amendment, Councilmember Robert White.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate the work that you and Councilmember McDuffie have done so far to improve the housing in downtown proposal to ensure the district is getting the outcomes we want to see downtown. The proposal as passed in first reading would provide developers with a 20-year tax abatement, a 10-year exemption from TOPA, and removal of first source for both the development and construction phase of office to residential conversions downtown. This would result in significant savings for developers. In return, the district would gain affordable housing units to help revitalize downtown. However, in the past, we have not always centered equity in times of financial hardship, and the result has been increased displacement during recovery. We need to learn from these mistakes as we address the problems of today and envision the future of the city that we want. We all agree that affordable housing is critical to the future of our city. My amendment aims to increase affordable housing without reducing the viability of the overall package of incentives. Assessing the program's effectiveness and viability depends on reducing the costs and risks to those who take on projects downtown. Expensive construction and rising insurance rates have limited interest in converting downtown commercial properties to residential ones. Therefore, we're offering incentives to mitigate these challenges. Maintaining a delicate balance between incentives and affordability adjustments is what my amendment has achieved. To make a conversion project viable, a yield on cost of 5.8% to 6% is needed. My amendment proposes a 5.8% yield on cost. Additionally, I consulted an expert who worked on the initial proposal, who confirmed that my amendment works. Under my amendment, the current requirement that 15% of new units be affordable at 80% of the median family income will increase to 18% at 80% MFI. This amendment on average will include roughly 6 additional affordable housing units per new residential building downtown. While the percentages seem small, the impact will be meaningful for families who have been living and working in the district for generations and can no longer afford to stay here. We must revitalize downtown, and we must do it with their needs in mind. It is crucial to note that the housing tax abatement alone is not enough to achieve an inclusive vision for downtown. There is more work to be done, and I'm committed to working with residents to understand their desires for downtown and to help make those aspirations a reality. We must ensure that downtown remains accessible, in particular to residents who have been pushed out in the past. This amendment represents a small but meaningful step forward. I move my amendment number 1 to the BSA. Again, this will increase a bit the amount of affordable housing downtown without impacting the viability of this very important program to transform our downtown. So I move amendment number 1 at this time. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember White. You said amendment number one, which is what it's captioned as. If you have subsequent amendments, I think this is the only one from you,
One of one.
one of one. Is there discussion on the amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Councilmember McDuffie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to take this opportunity to just weigh in on this amendment a little bit. Both Robert White and I had a chance to review the affordable housing requirements for this housing in downtown tax abatement program in our respective committees. And I want to acknowledge the work of my team on this, as well as the work of Councilmember White's team on getting us to where we are today. Acknowledging where we are today, I'm weary of making last minute changes to what I think is a very delicate balance that we struck after very careful analysis within our committees. In our committee on business and economic development, we reviewed several pro forma statements for projects based on the options at the two affordability levels, both 60% median family income as well as 80% MFI offered by the tax abatement. And based on reviewing the financial projects, we found an opportunity to better balance those two levels so that one option was not substantially more advantageous to developers than the other option. In other words, by moving from 8% of units at 60% MFI as proposed by the mayor to 10% of units at 60% MFI and the BSA, we ensured that the option was not significantly more favorable than the other option at 15% of units at 80% MFI. I know this is a lot of numbers, but I think it bears really putting this on the record. I think this amendment, while well-meaning, again, disturbs that balance based on our evaluation of the financial models. It's not going to lead to more affordable housing units. And I think that's the bottom line. And instead, almost certainly will lead to developers choosing the 10% of units at 60% MFI option, or simply foregoing a project or the abatement in total. That would lead to a different policy outcome for affordable units in downtown than the more balanced options that we passed on first reading. In fact, I think it's going to lead to fewer affordable units just at a different MFI level. And I want you all to be mindful of that. So I would ask you all to think about the two versions, think about this amendment. And as I mentioned at first reading, the Office to Residential Conversion projects are challenging endeavors that already face numerous headwinds. We'll need to carefully monitor and potentially make additional adjustments to this tax abatement program in the coming months and years as we see projects enroll. I want you all to remember this year's BSA is already modifying the tax abatement program we passed initially last year. Another minute, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
And a final point I want to make is for you all to understand that not a single project applied for the abatement with the requirements that we set forth last year. So what we did in committee and on first reading was attempt to incent the activity that I think we all want. I think this amendment actually undermines the incentive. So I would ask for patience as the district navigates an unprecedented redevelopment of our downtown and not to disturb the delicate balance we're seeking to achieve. And I think we have achieved already without this amendment. So again, don't want to be confrontational. I think Councilman White has put a lot of work into this, but I think it's going to actually undermine the district's efforts to incent the type of activity that I think we all want. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember McDuffie. If I could ask two questions of you, Councilmember McDuffie. Does 3% make all that much difference? And the second question is, if we did get it wrong by increasing it from 15 to 18, why can't we fix it later? Why isn't it good enough to fix it later?
So, when I ask the people who know this and the people who are in the industry, 3% does make a lot of difference. They will tell you, and I think maybe Councilman White, I think he acknowledged this in the statement. They will tell you that it just changes the numbers. And so technically, it's not that it doesn't work. But if the design is for the government to incent activity that we want, then we should not add language that makes the incentive less attractive, right? And you may hear a little bit of this on the next amendment that comes up. We want people to convert vacant office buildings to residential, that we can have a better mix downtown. And so it does make all that much difference, according to the people who are experts in this space. And what we don't want is to have two incentives or two levels, and all they do is focus on one, and we don't have balance to the affordability that we're able to track. And then the result is also we have few affordable units. The second piece is, sure, we can fix it next year, but will we find ourselves next year, Chairman, saying nobody's applied for this incentive? And the same that we sit here a year after initially proposing this and nobody's applied.
I'm going to reclaim my time. Councilmember Pinto?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank Councilmember McDuffie and Councilmember White both for working hard on getting this balance right. I think a couple of things that you both said have been interesting. As I think about bringing back downtown and making it truly resilient, I worry when I speak to people in the private sector who are interested in pursuing these types of projects and the options they have available to them in other states and in other regions. Many of those other states who have tried similar models that have had more and more layered on when it comes to affordability have had almost zero success. Those states that have had just incentives without a lot of conditions attached have had a lot of success. So I think that this is how we have it currently without the amendment is an important demonstration of our values in the district, that we want to incentivize this, but we want to make sure that affordability is part of the equation. But if we go too far in trying to pursue our other really important strategy of having more affordable housing in DC, I really worry we're going to lose out on people pursuing these projects at all. The other thing Councilor Robert White said about displacement, I think you've made a lot of really good points about this important issue over the last several months, about as we're looking to bring new residents to DC and bringing more vibrancy to downtown, we need to be thoughtful about how we do that and inclusive with how we do that. And these buildings that we're talking about are not where people are living currently. They're vacant office buildings that are being unutilized or underutilized, where people are not renewing their leases. So bringing people at all is going to be really helpful to the vibrancy and the safety of downtown and in our continued effort to build more supply and build more affordable housing. So I would, concur with Councilmember McDuffie that these numbers were not, thought up in thin air. They were worked out with dozens and dozens of people to think about how far we could go with achieving our affordability goals in the district while still making these projects viable. And so I also worry about these kind of last minute amendments here. And I guess, let me ask one question, if I may, to Councilmember White, which is for the 3%, I know some of these percents have changed over the last several months, but kind of what is your thinking about that 3% addition not undermining the viability of these projects?
Great question, Councilmember Pinto. I wanted to get as much affordable housing as we can downtown. That has to be a priority. And so I worked with some of the people who worked on the original proposal to understand where we had a little bit of cushion that we could still achieve the yield on cost that they were desiring. This amendment stays within the yield on cost that they are hoping to achieve. So it does not, I think, disincentivize anybody, but it does maximize the amount of affordable housing we can get without ignoring the fact that folks expect to make a certain amount of profit.
Councilmember Fruman?
So there's a lot of numbers floating around, and I want to ask for a couple more. This idea of yield on cost and the balance. I think you said that the yield on costs that folks are looking for is between 5.8 and 6, and this legislation lands at 5.8. But is there a difference between the scenarios? What's the yield on costs at the 10%, 60% AMI, and the yield on cost at the 18%, 80% AMI? And how did that does that compare to? Well, the yield on cost at 18% at, or 15% at 80% AMI. Do you have those numbers?
10% at 60% AMI is, I believe, 5.8. Yeah, yield on cost.
And the 18% at 80% AMI is also 5.8? I guess this question
In
goes
this-
to.
Did you say this again?
Councilmember White, are we waiting for you to answer a question?
I'm not sure. I have an answer. 10% at 60 AMI, and what I'm proposing, 18% at 80 AMI. Both of them are 5.8.
Mr. Ruman?
Well, it looks like Councilmember McDuffie also may have an answer to this question. And
If you're
there's a lot of
asking
others.
him, yes.
I am asking him. Thank you.
So I want to say this in a way that just so everybody understands, this is not, I fully appreciate where Councilman White is coming from. And we've talked about this, right? Here's the challenge. If what he's positing is that if you do 10% at 60, as was already proposed, or you do what's in this amendment, 18% affordable, 18% of units at 80% AMI, MFI, you have the same yield. What they originally wanted was 6%. So both of them are less than what the market wants in terms of a return. So if you're getting the same return on both of those, why would you do 18% of your units if you only need to do 60%? I'm sorry, 10%. And if you choose it to do 10%, it's fewer of your units that you get out of the project. So ultimately the district gets fewer units, right? You get the same return that you get on 18% of your units. Why would you choose to do more?
Mr. Chairman, one more minute for one more question to Mr. McDuffie.
Well, but the answer's got to be within the minute.
Okay,
There's no
so,
objection.
Councilmember McDuffie, what was the return on the 15% at 80% AMI? Are you saying that that was a 6% return? That's
It was about 6%.
so the effect of it is that the old system incentivized 80% AMI. This system actually, which would result in more units, this system levels it and may result in fewer overall units, but more 60% AMI units. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes, thank you. In trying to understand this, thank you, Councilman Robert White, for clarity about the other. My question was about other levels of affordability, and I did see 6% AMI, and that was 10%. And I guess based on my preliminary calculation, that's a household of earning about $86,000 a year, and looking at the 80% AMI. Which would be at 18%, is households earning about $115,000 a year, and that's a household, I guess, calculated an average of 4 people. I wanted to know, because based on my conversation, I do want to say that I'm in favor of making sure our downtown is vibrant and is being restored, so we can get those taxes from there and continue our economic growth. But I did hear a lot of conversation about those buildings being non-convertible. And if someone can speak to that, and I guess they're speaking to the office buildings trying to be converted into apartments, and some of them simply doesn't, with the windows and bedrooms and bathrooms, it's hard to convert those units to apartments. I don't know how far we got in that conversation and how we arrived here.
That's right, Councilmember White. Some buildings as they exist now can't be converted because of the size or distance between floor plates, as you mentioned, because of the number of windows where they land on the block. So some buildings can be converted. Some would have to be demolished and reconstructed. But there are many ways to sort of get at creating housing downtown. Many buildings that can be converted, and we want to start that process. So you are correct. Not all commercial buildings can be converted to residential.
Has there been analysis done about how many buildings will be converted? What's the estimated revenues of these buildings? How just kind of a projection of what does this bill and the amendment do for DC in the long run relates to the taxes?
Without converting buildings, the vacancy rate right now in commercial buildings is so high that it is creating a significant lag. It's going to continue. The vacancy rate is going to continue because as leases expire, folks aren't going to renew those leases. So those buildings are in a lot of trouble. If we don't make a turn downtown to start to get these buildings into productive use, then that means that money is not coming into our tax rolls, that vacant buildings are going to cause, I think, more vacant buildings and eventually a very dead downtown.
Can I just with the,
I got a few seconds left. I just want to make sure that what we're doing is heading in the right direction long term. And I don't know if I heard that yet. I think you had something.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just,
Without objection.
so I agree with what Councilmember Robert White just said. I will say, based on the numbers as we've looked at them and the conversations that we've had with people in the development community, and I think the expectation is you get 2 to 3 of these maybe per year. And that's if you can maximize the full abatement. The reason I mentioned in my earlier statement that we haven't had one yet, notwithstanding the fact that the abatement has been on the books for over a year, it lends itself to the need to tweak it to try to better incent the activity. We thought we achieved that balance within the committee and the first vote on the BSA. And despite, I think, a well-meaning attempt by Councilmember Robert White to tweak it a little further, I think it undermines the balance that we had struck. Either way, you really can't predict it, you know. And frankly, I'll tell you, one of the places I'm looking at is Calgary in Canada, of all places, because they seem to have put money in their budget to really incent these conversions. In fact, they're getting 3-bedroom units. They're getting a higher percentages of affordable. And guess what? To Councilmember Pinto's earlier point, they're not even mandating affordability levels or unit levels. The market is so attractive to developers that the municipality gets to select the projects it wants without mandating the requirements. And so I think we're both attempting to strike the appropriate balance. And, you know, either way, I think we're trying to move things forward, Councilmember Trayon White, but I think what we've already done in the BSA better strikes the balance.
I thank you, Councilmember Bonds.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to, I believe that my question has been answered. I was concerned with the number of units that we can anticipate would be realized through this amendment of Councilmember White, and hearing that it may be 2 or 3 additional units causes me to pause because we are attempting to redesign downtown because we know it's no longer functioning as our commercial core. And in doing so, it just causes me to pause and think that what is our goal? Is our goal to redevelop downtown in a manner where we will have yield of revenue through our taxes, or is it that we're saying this can begin to be the place where we put more affordability and actually realize that? So the question for me is our taxes and our tax base. And I thank you very much, both of you, for your comments, you and Mr. McDuffie, for providing some insight into this. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Bonds. If there's no one else on first round,
Councilmember Nadeau wishes to be recognized, Mr. Chairman.
thank you, Councilmember Nadeau.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry to have to be joining virtually today, but I have a sick kiddo at home. You know, I came today prepared to vote present on this amendment, mainly because I disagree with the underlying aspect of the BSA and thus also with the amendment itself, because both of them are pertaining to a part of the mayor's incentive that also exempts the downtown from TOPA. However, after this discussion today, I feel compelled to support the amendment. I'm somewhat disturbed by the debate over whether 3% will tank the whole downtown. I think it's great that we're creating a tax abatement. I think there's a lot more we need to do to incent building housing downtown, all of which is outlined in a report commissioned by this council and this housing chairman. And it's pretty clear, and a lot of which we're not even touching with any of this. So I am going to support this amendment today. And I will get into more later about the TOPA piece with my amendment. But I just wanted to put that on the record today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. On second round, Councilmember Robert White.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is a time where we have to think very critically, as Councilmember Trayon White asked, where we are going. What's the future of downtown? I think most people acknowledge that downtown will not be 5 years from now what it was 5 years ago. If we don't shift and change the uses of downtown, it will die, and with it goes the revenues of our city. So we have a clear and very important goal. But this isn't the first time we've been in financial trouble as a city. About 20 years ago, we were in significant financial trouble, and the city set itself on a path to get increased revenues, but at the expense of many existing residents. So as we look again to stabilize our economy in the long term, we have to at every point ask how can we maximize the opportunities for our residents. That's what I'm seeking to do here. There are 11 stalled building conversions downtown. My understanding from the same folks who helped write the mayor's proposal is that those properties need about a 5.4% yield on investment to move forward. 5.4%. The yield on cost in my amendment is 5.8%. This, to Councilmember Bonds' point, we are creating not 3, but closer to about 6 affordable units per building additional with this amendment. That adds up over time. We need every single unit we can get. So if this amendment increases the amount of affordable housing without reducing the viability of downtown, I think it's our obligation to go in that direction. I'm not going to do anything to risk the future of downtown, but I'm going to do everything I can to maximize the return on the people who are here, who are hoping that we're going to do everything we can. And so again, the yield on cost in my amendment is higher than the yield on cost needed to unstick the stalled conversion project downtown now. So I would ask my colleagues to support this amendment. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember White. Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes, Chairman. To Councilmember White's point again, I guess my continuous concern is about where would these residents come from? What's the demographics of the residents? And we talking about affordability. Affordable for who? DC, I remember just about 6, 7 years ago, DC wanted to create a DC to 1 million people. It was all on the news. It was at every press conference, and we've seen actually a decrease in population. Navy Yard is one of the communities added to Ward 8, and I look at all the high rises in their community, and they are still not to capacity. And so when we talk about additional housing, I'm not sure, people earning between $80,000 and $120,000 a year, where this population is going to come from. That's just my 2 cents on it. I don't have enough information about DC's full vision to restore downtown. And I want to be supportive, but I have more questions than answers. I want to add that to the comments. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Councilmember. If there's no further discussion,
Could I just say, Mr. Chairman?
second round, Councilmember McDuffie.
I want to be clear. I think in his effort to move this amendment, just as in my effort as chair of the Committee on Business and Economic Development to tweak this within the committee, both Councilmember Robert White and myself intend to try to address the challenges that we face with housing affordability in the District of Columbia. It is one of the most critical issues to maintaining the beautiful diversity that exists in the District of Columbia today. Having been there during those tough times, having grown up, in fact, in the midst of control board and all the challenges, fortunate enough to be in a family that was able to stay here when so many families were displaced. The goal is to maximize the district's incentives to create as much affordable housing as possible. I think this is a situation where it's really a tough call. And nobody can predict how many of these things are going to work. My conversations with my team and the experts in the field suggest that the way that we had structured this coming out of committee in the first vote of the BSA was the best way to maximize the incentive. And I think this amendment just tweaks it a bit in the wrong direction. But I think it's just yet another attempt to try to address the serious housing challenges that we're facing. And so this is one of those situations I think folks just need to vote their conscience. And I appreciate what folks will land on this. I can't support it for the reasons that I've articulated, because I think ultimately it will not yield more affordable housing as an incentive to the community that we want to make these conversions. I think it will yield less.
Thank you. Second round, Councilmember Freeman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have to say that I'm really grappling with this. I think it is about less than it somehow appears, because the difference, on the one hand, it takes away 0.2% in return on cost on one option. And how big is that? I think, will that have the effect of lowering investment or driving investment to the other option, that the 60% AMI option? And I think that's where you get into it, where and you had said that folks are looking for 5.8 to 6. 5.8 is the lowest, 6 is the high end of that. Could that have a little bit more of an incentive to do more projects? Maybe. And then what will happen? Will we have fewer 80% AMI units under this scenario, but more 60%, but overall fewer? And that's, both of those are bands for which there's high demand. So I'm not sure that the world ends either way this comes out. For me, my tack in this budget process has been to try to support as aggressively as possible the return of downtown. So my inclination is going to vote against this amendment, but I can't say it's, I think I see it as a very close call.
Thank you. There's no further discussion. The vote is on the amendment by Councilmember Robert White. All those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Roll
Opposed?
call, Mr. Chairman.
Roll call's been requested. Madam Secretary, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Nadeau,
Aye.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker,
Aye.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto,
Aye.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White,
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White,
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Freeman.
No.
Councilmember Freeman votes no. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
No.
Councilmember McDuffie votes no. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 11 yeses and 2 nos.
The amendment is approved. Councilmember Parker, I believe you have 2 amendments.
Yes, technically 3, but 2 are related. One is to the Emergency Act. The first amendment deals with the Commission on School Safety that we're creating. And I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, as well as the Deputy Mayor for working with me on this. I'm offering a friendly and simple amendment that preserves a key component of Subtitle T of Title IV originally offered. My amendment clarifies that one of the duties of that School Safety Commission that the Deputy Mayor for Education will help lead and produce a report on the responsibilities could be assumed by safety staff who are unarmed and who are neither law enforcement or security guards. If we fail to incorporate this amendment, there is a chance that the committee may not realize its potential to improve school safety in the district because it will be in jeopardy of rehashing some of the same arguments around SROs rather than exploring other alternative options. And so just to clarify, this amendment makes clear in the language of the BSA that for that School Safety Commission, the task force will be exploring options for non-law enforcement, non-armed individuals. They will work in concert with SROs and school leadership teams on school safety teams. But the key point here is to emphasize an alternative to law enforcement. And without clarifying that language, there's a chance that what comes out of the commission may be a bit muddied. I did work with the chairman on this, and I am offering that language for the record. And I shared this previously. Title 4, Subtitle T, and paragraph 4192 is amended to read as follows, quote, recommended staffing configurations of a school safety team, including descriptions of possible responsibilities and hiring qualifications of school safety employees, parentheses, who are not law enforcement or security guards, in parentheses. So Mr. Chairman, that is the First Amendment. And I would just, one clarifying note, I am also planning to offer an identical amendment to the same subtitle in the Budget Support Emergency Act.
Thank you, Councilmember Parker. We have the amendment before us. It's to line 2055. There are a lot of lines in this bill. And to be clear, it's only that one paragraph that has the amendment. Councilmember Parker did discuss this with me. I have no objection to it. Is there discussion on the amendment? By a voice vote, all those in favor say aye.
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 Are there any opposed? The amendment is approved unanimously. Councilmember, you had a second amendment. Sounds like we're talking about the Constitution. You had an amendment number 2, which I think you called amendment number 3.
It is amendment number 2. Just quick process question. Do I need, no. Okay.
You circulated it this morning. No, you
We
circulated it
circulated
last night. And then a
and
slight change this morning to clarify what you're amending.
yes, so I am offering a second amendment that would remove the 50% cap for the Commission on the Arts and Humanities grants for organizations with operating budgets of $150,000 or less. I know there's been a bit of discussion around this, and I am persuaded that such a cap would disproportionately and negatively impact small organizations, startup organizations who deserve equitable access to government funding. Organizations like the Capoeira Spot on Rhode Island Avenue and Ward 5 benefit from grant funding from the Commission on Arts. And this amendment will now ensure that there are no caps on the support they and many other organizations across the city can receive, as long as their budgets are $115,000 or less. I work closely with leadership of the Commission on Arts and Chairman Mendelson to address ballot equity concerns raised about the cap for smaller groups, while ensuring we still put the onus on organizations to develop strong fiscal responsibility. What's more, by maintaining the cap for organizations with larger budgets, and by larger, we're proposing those are groups with budgets of $115,000 and more, we make sure that a finite amount of funding for grants through the Commission on Arts can spur creativity for more groups throughout the city. While this amendment addresses one concern raised by the Commission on Arts, there are others, namely the confirmation of new members to the commission. As has been discussed, the delayed confirmation is due to the executive failing to cure errors in the nominating petitions sent to the council. And it is my understanding by the chairman that those errors have finally been fixed and the council will take up those nominations soon. But as far as this amendment, it would remove the 50% cap for grants offered by the Commission on Arts for organizations with a budget of less than $115,000. I want to thank Councilmember Fruman for joining me in introducing this amendment. And again, thanks to Chairman Mendelson for working with me to meet the valid equity concerns raised by the Commission on Arts. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Parker. Councilmember Fruman?
Yeah, I want to thank Councilmember Parker for his leadership on this work, and Chairman Mendelson for your willingness to work on this and come to what I think is a really positive solution so that we can move forward and support this very important institution, the Commission on Arts and Humanities. I also echo the thanks for the work that you, Chairman Mendelson, have been doing to push forward on these appointments. Let's have a great year for the Commission on Arts and Humanities, and thank you for your leadership on this.
Thank you, Councilmember Fruman. Before I recognize another council member, let me say this. So Councilmember Parker discussed this with me yesterday, and I indicated that I'll accept this amendment. I do believe fundamentally that nonprofit organizations should not get grants that are greater than 50% of their budget. I think this is a best practice. I think many others believe this is a best practice. When I say others, I mean advisors to nonprofits. It protects their long-term sustainability because if they rely too much on one grantor for their budget, then they are very vulnerable to anything that might happen regarding that one singular grantor. And also, I think the size of the grant relative to the budget reflects a capacity to operate. Nonetheless, as Councilmember Parker indicated, I do see this as a compromise, and so I will be supporting this. Councilmember Henderson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can appreciate your comments, although when this issue came up, I was curious in terms of why we had a cap altogether. We pay the staff over at the Arts and Humanities Commission a lot of money to mine the bank, if you will. And while there have been challenges in the past with the commission, I did feel as though they are the experts to be able to appropriately determine whether or not someone is receiving too much or in a financial disarray. That being said, I did want to ask just a clarifying question to Councilmember Parker in terms of why 115,000 was selected as opposed to say 150,000?
Great question. And so in discussion with leadership at the Commission on Arts, they had proposed 250,000. And in an effort to strike a compromise, I did have access to a list or a roster of the grants that they provided. And so it was rough math at trying to average where the middle line was. And there were some organizations, frankly, that we saw on the list that we thought should be included within that number. I think if we were to go to the 150,000 mark, that's doable if you want to offer a friendly amendment. But 115,000 was just our effort to do the rough math, given the roster of grants that were provided.
Okay, I haven't looked at the list, so I'm not gonna offer an amendment just to sort of.
We can share it with you.
To pick a number.
yes.
But I was curious in terms of how you got to 115. Thank you. Thank
The
you.
list that
And Mr.
Councilmember
Chair-
Parker is referring to, with the 115, it's roughly, if I remember correctly, about 2/3 of the grantees this year would still be eligible for grants greater than 50% of their budget.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could, just to one point that you made, I do believe this amendment strikes the balance of fiscal responsibility, but also I think it's important for us to realize that not all organizations have equitable access to funding through traditional means. And so by removing this cap on smaller groups, those with budgets less than 115,000, even if the grant exceeds 50% of their budget, I don't think it's fair to consider that poor money management or a lack of fiscal responsibility, because we know there are some inequities in funding access for groups, namely those led by Black and Brown folk, namely those connected to natives in art forms. I shared the example yesterday with the chairman that I have a friend who's an artist, and maybe they could start an organization with a budget of about $5,000, and it would be great for them to have seed funding to get off the ground, to be able to spur and engage in thoughtful art forms throughout the city. So I'm really happy with the balance we struck, and really, again, thank you for your partnership on this, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember McDuffie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to
Chairman,
thank both Mr. Parker and you for working this out and getting to a place that I can support. I will caution folks about this notion that smaller organizations shouldn't be so dependent on grants, and suggest that we think about this. There are a lot of organizations that are large by today's standards that once upon a time were small organizations that had government support. These types of grants are frequently leveraged to build capacity, and that's precisely what we like to see happen with our arts community, particularly when it comes to organizations run by Black and Brown residents and are really utilizing their resources to support Black and Brown artists. And so I think the work on the Arts Commission is absolutely critical. I'm happy that we have some new leadership there in Aaron Myers. I really appreciate all the work that the chair of the board, Reggie Van Lee, has been doing. And I appreciate the advocacy of people who are willing to say things that frequently are unpopular, like Ron Moten, like Cora Masters Barry, and Natalie Hopkinson, in order to make sure that people in our position are informed about what's happening on the ground. There are a lot of small organizations that, with the support of the government, one day, hopefully, will be larger arts organizations. And I think today's vote is precisely the type of vote that we need in order to continue to support those types of organizations, because they are supporting the people in communities that for a long time have been marginalized. So I look forward to supporting this amendment. I appreciate you all working this out.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Tran White.
Thank you, Chairman, for acknowledging me. I want to give comment to this. I have a lot of mixed thoughts as it relates to this, because as a former executive director of a nonprofit who received monies from the Arts and Humanities Commission, it was very hard for me, partly because a grassroots organization, I didn't have a lot of rich friends. I didn't have access to prolific grant writers. And so in the conversation early on and how we got here was trying to create equity as relates to organizations who are smaller, especially Black and brown organizations in DC and East of the River organizations in DC. Historically, we know that there has been money spent over the years for a lot of the larger, predominantly white, wealthy organizations who can use that money as leverage to then raise more money through donors and through philanthropic efforts. I'm concerned about the cap because the cap is a way to exclude people who don't have access to capital. And I think that grants is a way that the government supports local nonprofit organizations to do great work in the community. And I was excited to go to Martin Luther King Library last year at the commission's board meeting to learn how some of the money have been distributed to some of the smaller organizations, only to come back now to try to hear that we're trying to restrain some of that being done. We know that a lot of these large organizations are conglomerates when it comes to money they receive. I remember during the Jack Evans era, all the money that's been funded to, the Lincoln Theater, the Ford Theater, the Kennedy Center, and we never had a problem. But now it seems like we're giving money to smaller organizations. We're talking about a cap. And so, I want to thank Councilman Parker for trying to create a healthy compromise, but it concerns me that now we had this conversation talking about pulling money back from organizations who don't have money. And we've never had this conversation before when organizations who historically got millions and millions of dollars over the years from the government, we've never talked about pulling back. And so this is where we are with this. It's my hope that we can give out more money to organizations who are doing great work in the community, especially those east of Anacostia River, without creating these stipulations, because they simply need it. They can't afford grant writers and staff to be efficient doing programming without additional support and help. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember White. Councilmember Louis George.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank my colleague, Councilmember Zachary Parker, for his work on this. Investing in arts and creativity should not be limited by who can and can't afford good fundraisers. And we know because of pervasive and systemic racism, Black communities have less disposable income to invest in things like the arts. The work of the Art Commission is so important and critical. And I think this amendment preserves equitable granting opportunities by adjusting this cap, and it allows the district to expand opportunities for small organizations and startups to secure funding with the long-term goal of these organizations becoming self-sustaining. I think this is critical work. I am grateful for both the leadership of the commission past and present. And I look forward to seeing more district residents, more DC natives, more Black and brown artists and organizations uplifted as we move forward in this direction. And so I will be voting yes, and am in full support of the work that we're going to do moving forward to make sure that we are supporting our artists in the district of all backgrounds who continue to do critical work for us here in the District of Columbia. Thank you.
Councilmember Bonds.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to add my voice of comment to this important determination that we apparently have made, this compromise, and I think it's certainly moves us in the right direction. And I think we are addressing the issue of equity in our community. Many of the longstanding arts groups in the city, they got their start at some point. And they did it with a generous support from our government. And so to read in the subtitle for the Budget Support Act that this was an opportunity to focus on downsizing the amount of remittance to small and perhaps startup organizations, and at the same time stipulate, well, we have to continue to give to the larger, more prominent organizations, didn't fit well for me. And so today we are moving in the right direction. We are saying that equity is a condition that we want to see universally throughout the district's utilization of its revenue. And so I'm excited and I'm happy, and I think that our community will grow from this and will be successful from it. So thank you for the compromise, and thank you, Councilmember Parker especially, and of course, Chairman Mendelson for reaching this conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Bonds. Councilmember Pinto.
Thanks very much, Chairman Mendelson, and thank you, Councilmember Parker and Councilmember Fruman for introducing this measure. I think many of our colleagues have made really helpful and important points today about the equity needs in our arts community, and I appreciate the point Councilmember Tran White just made about funding questions that sometimes aren't provided for larger organizations that are provided for smaller ones. I'm going to support this bill today. I do just want to make the point, though, that I think it's important that we support all of our arts organizations. There are a lot of benefits of providing seed funding, as Councilmember Parker talked about, and making sure that we are empowering our artists and institutions that may be smaller to scale up. And I think it's also important to support some of our larger institutions that have really been instrumental in bringing people to the District of Columbia, in generating jobs for more artists across the city, in generating training opportunities for young people and artists from all 8 wards, in getting people to come to the city to see a show that then may inspire them to use our transportation system, go to a restaurant, support other small businesses. And so I think both are very important parts of the equation here that I hope the commission can continue to focus on both of those important goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Pinto. Councilmember Robert White.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank my colleagues, Councilmember Parker and Fruman, and you, Chairman, for working on this important amendment. I'm mostly associating myself with comments of my colleagues at this point, but I think it is so important that smaller arts organizations have the opportunity to get off the ground, which can take some years. And for those who come from communities with less access to capital, it can be even harder than for some other folks. But these smaller organizations over time become feeders for larger institutions like the Kennedy Center and Woolly Mammoth and the Shakespeare Theater. For people who find their entry point into the arts through these smaller organizations, we want them to exist and to be able to grow. And I think this amendment creates more of an opportunity for that to happen, and therefore creates a richer city and a richer arts community. So I appreciate my colleagues working on this amendment, and I look forward to supporting it.
Thank you. We have the amendment before us.
Chairman,
Councilmember McDuffie.
I just wanted
second
to
round.
publicly acknowledge, I think I was listing names of people who were responsible for getting us to this point, but I neglected to mention my Ward 3 colleague, Matt Fruman. So I wanted to do that publicly and acknowledge, which I think is a very important work on this as well, especially given the ward that he represents. And I appreciate 2 ward members coming together to put us to this point today. So thank you.
Thank you. We have the amendment before us. All those in favor of the amendment say aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. Councilmember Parker, you had 2 amendments. That was your second. Next, Councilmember Nadeau, you had an amendment.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm introducing my amendment number 1 to be 24-202, the fiscal year 2024 Budget Support Act of 2023. This amendment eliminates the 10-year exemption from the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act for properties granted a tax abatement for housing downtown. I understand the reasoning behind the exemption. This is an extraordinary time. We need to do everything we can to encourage more housing downtown, to revive the tax base there and revitalize activity. But everything we can includes more than simply a TOPA exemption. There are policies and actions we can pursue to facilitate growth downtown before we start poking holes in what I believe to be a sacrosanct right that has been established in DC code and in practice. For something to be a right, it cannot be selectively applied when it is convenient. When we create an exemption here, we open the door to an exemption there and another one and another one. This exemption from TOPA is a line that once crossed cannot be undone. TOPA has existed since 1980, and despite amendments over the years has remained resilient as a bedrock component of tenant rights in the district, as well as one of the most impactful means of establishing sustainable and affordable housing opportunities for residents who may not have been able to access them. For some, TOPA is their white whale. They've been looking for a way to get past it for ages. A moment of weakness presented by the situation downtown is the best opportunity they've had to punch a hole in that wall. Before we've even passed the BSA, we've been hearing proposals for how other projects can be exempt from TOPA too, if they pay into a certain fund, provide a certain amount of affordability, et cetera. I don't think it's being overly dramatic to say that if we pass this now, TOPA as a tenant right is more or less done for. As far as investing in new housing downtown, it'll continue to happen. And there is more we can do to facilitate that. We can drive housing production with changes to parking minimums, zoning reform, commercial vacancy consolidation, and subsidies, to name a few. Policies and actions named by the Office to Affordable Housing Task Force report funded by Councilmember Robert White. It's important to note that as we're considering this first breach in the TOPA dam, other jurisdictions are working to bolster their tenant purchase options. San Francisco, Berkeley, and the city of Boston, for example. Instead of giving freer rein to developers focused on markets only, these jurisdictions are focusing on the idea of guaranteeing people tools that say stay, contribute, and be a part of this place, rather than creating zones of housing where people will always be priced out and not get a fair shot at ownership. Where is the path to the middle class without it? Allowing the erosion of something we've established as a right isn't easily undone. Exempting certain housing from TOPA tears a hole in the fabric of tenant rights that can only be widened. I hope you'll join me in pressing pause on this dangerous precedent and protecting what we have collectively agreed upon as an important tenant protection and right. With that, I move the amendment. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Nadeau. Discussion on the amendment,
Mr. Chairman.
Councilmember McDuffie.
Thank you. I think once again, this morning we're presented with an amendment that is well-intentioned, but likely will ruin any chances of our housing and downtown tax abatement actually achieving the results that we seek as a city. I believe that TOPA is an important part of our tenant rights laws. And I think everybody on this body would agree with that. I'm looking forward to the comprehensive report on TOPA that will be produced by CNHED to see how we can make TOPA even more effective. But contrary to what was floating out there when this amendment was initially circulated, this and what we've done already in the BSA is not a blanket 10 or 15-year exemption from TOPA requirements. The proposed abatement contains a limited exemption from TOPA for the first sale or transfer of a property as long as it happens within 10 years of the project completion. What does that mean? It means that it's allowed a project to attract the necessary capital to invest in converting the building because those capital partners know with certainty that they will be able to get their capital back out of the project without long delays. It is a one-shot deal. After the first sale, TOPA returns as normal and continues throughout the life of the building. But in the here and now, we cannot pretend like TOPA does not affect decisions on whether to invest in a district. And this abatement serves as a very specific purpose. We as a government are asking the private sector to do something that we believe is needed in our city, which is converting vacant or obsolete office buildings in downtown to residential buildings. It's really the reverse of most tax abatements we see on the council, where someone comes to us with the project seeking help. As I mentioned previously, not a single project sought to use the tax abatement we passed last year for housing in downtown. And it's pretty clear that means the incentive structure currently is off. Hence the work that we've done in committee and already approved on the first reading of the BSA. It's been argued that because TOPA is a right, exempting certain housing from TOPA, and I quote from the amendment's rationale, tears a hole in the fabric of tenants' rights, close quote. There are numerous exceptions, exemptions and changes that were in the law from the start and that have been added as recently as a few years ago. I would implore my colleagues to reject this amendment and allow the balanced and reasonable limited TOPA exemption to take effect as is, so that we can incent more housing in downtown, including affordable housing.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Robert White and then Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank my colleague, Councilmember Nadeau, for this amendment. I won't be supporting it, but that's not an easy decision. I want to talk a bit about why. I think Councilmember Nadeau and I, and all of us on the council, want to help tenants as much as possible. What we're thinking through here are the processes. With respect to downtown, right now, downtown is dying. And if we don't make a turn, that is going to have significant impacts on our city, the resources that we are able to provide to communities, and what our city looks like for decades to come. In an ideal scenario, what I think most of us, if not all of us, want is housing and TOPA. But all scenarios, including this one, are not ideal. And I would say that housing is sort of more of a priority than TOPA, because there is no TOPA without housing. If you talk to residents about their biggest needs, their biggest concerns, the number 1 or 2 on that list for almost everyone you talk to is going to be housing. We need more affordable housing. The more housing we build downtown, the more affordable housing we build downtown. So I would say that at this time, we have to prioritize housing. We have to prioritize affordable housing. The issue here with TOPA that I don't like, but I recognize as a difficult reality, is that building housing takes investments. And when people are deciding what they are going to invest in, they're looking at risks. TOPA comes with a significant risk because TOPA takes about a year on average. It will cost a lot of money. So if folks start to say, you know what, I'm not going to invest in housing, I'm going to just put my money in bonds or another investment that I see as more safe, then no housing gets built downtown, which means no affordable housing gets built downtown. So again, this is not an ideal scenario, but I do believe that we have got to prioritize housing. The other thing I would say about a TOPA exemption for the early years of a project is that TOPA is an anti-displacement tool. Right now, there aren't people downtown that we fear of displacement. We need to create housing so that people have more housing options, but there's not a fear in the near term with this exemption of displacement. And TOPA is at its root an anti-displacement tool. So it is difficult to not support this amendment, but I won't be supporting it. I also do want to recognize for the record that there is a fear that this is the camel's nose in the tent. And I think that's a concern that we as a council have to take very seriously. And I don't want my vote on this to indicate sort of a willingness to create more TOPA exemptions in the future. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wrestled with this one for several reasons. One, I'm not convinced that TOPA is working everywhere as intended. There is one property in particular that has been caught up in the TOPA process for several years. As things fall apart and the clock restarts, and then it can significantly delay the development of a project. And one of the things that inclines me not to support this amendment today is because I do think we have a very restricted exemption, as has been discussed, that this isn't a free-for-all, this isn't a giveaway, but it is to spur the development of downtown for all the reasons that have already been discussed. I would say, as a member of the Housing Committee, I welcome the opportunity for a hearing on TOPA in general, as I think we do need to explore how TOPA is operating, not just downtown, but across the city. But again, I appreciate Councilmember Nadeau's intentions here, but I'm just not persuaded that ensuring that we extend these incentives to bring downtown back will mean the end of TOPA across the city. And so for those reasons, I will not be supporting this amendment, but am a staunch supporter of TOPA rights to keep district residents in DC. Thank you.
Thank you. Further on the amendment,
Councilmember Louis George wishes to be recognized, Mr. Chairman.
Councilmember Louis George.
Thank you, Chairman. I guess I want to add my voice and experience to this debate in support of preserving TOPA rights. I'm just a little worried we're falling for the same okey doke that we fell for years ago when it related to TOPA as it related to single family residents, where people, said, oh, we need to do this. And there was a lot of one-off sort of ways in which it would be done. And then they guaranteed displacement wasn't going to happen. And then boom, 12,000 more Black district residents were displaced. And so I'm grappling with if we're falling for the okey doke again about what investors are and are not going to do as a result of it. And a given context, I know the TOPA for single family residents was different, but I am very weary given the history. For those who don't know, I used TOPA to save my family when we were when I was in school. The owners had rented for years and tried to sell the home, and we were able to exert our TOPA rights and gain access to the negotiating table and make an offer for the house that allowed us to avoid displacement from our community amidst rapid gentrification. I remember that experience, and I also remember when we made the decision to take away that opportunity. TOPA has given the same opportunity to thousands of others when their homes and apartment buildings are up for sale. By promoting home ownership, we promote stability and community in the district. And for many, TOPA creates a level playing field against wealthy developers who can pay cash for flip jobs. This was my family experience, so I know how important it can be to get that foot in the door. And I think whether you're living uptown in Brightwood Park or in new downtown housing, I believe all tenants deserve that equal access to opportunity as a homeowner. Similarly, if home ownership is out of reach, tenants must still have a say in the future of their property management and must be allowed to assign their TOPA rights to a new company they believe will serve the best interests of building residents. And, I think we should be clear, if developers downtown are no longer interested in operating the apartments they built, it should be tenants who have a first say in the future of their homes. I think incentivizing downtown housing should not be simply incentivizing real estate transactions for quick profit. Housing must be for people, not profit. And when we focus on our people and what is best for them and how we strengthen their stake in the community, we will see thriving neighborhoods. And if we are serious about revitalizing downtown, we need the people who will be living there to be invested, respected, and empowered. And that is what TOPA is all about. I think by eliminating TOPA rights, whether in a time-bound way or not, we undercut the residents of the district. We incentivize displacement and we create irreversible harm. We've been here before. We fell for the okie doke and Black residents were displaced after we took away TOPA rights for single family residents. And now people are saying, oh, our neighborhoods are all gentrified and my children can't afford homes. And well, yeah, you gave away TOPA rights. And so I don't want us to fall for the okie doke in this conversation any longer. I think TOPA isn't just an anti-displacement tool. It's also a tool to allow tenants to eventually buy and own their homes and to empower tenants to address housing conditions and affordability in their building when their building goes up for sale. And I urge my colleagues to vote for this amendment to protect the rights of tenants and promote homeownership opportunities for families like mine that will soon call downtown home. I don't want us to fall for the okey doke again. So I'm gonna support my colleague in this amendment as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. If there's no further discussion, we have the amendment before us. All those in favor of the amendment say aye.
Chairman, I'd like to request a roll call, please.
Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Parker,
No.
Councilmember Parker votes no. Councilmember Pinto,
No.
Councilmember Pinto votes no. Councilmember Robert White,
No.
Councilmember Robert White votes no. Councilmember Trayon White,
No.
Councilmember Trayon White votes no. Councilmember Allen,
No.
Councilmember Allen votes no. Councilmember Bonds,
No.
Councilmember Bonds votes no. Councilmember Fruman,
No.
Councilmember Fruman votes no. Councilmember Gray,
No.
Councilmember Gray votes no. Councilmember Henderson,
No.
Councilmember Henderson votes no. Councilmember Lewis George,
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie,
No.
Councilmember McDuffie votes no. Chairman Mendelson,
No.
Chairman Mendelson votes no. And Councilmember Nadeau,
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 2 yeses, 11 nos.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The amendment fails. The next amendment is Councilmember Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As of today in 2023, DC has experienced approximately twice as many deaths on our roadways as this time last year in 2022. Generally, residents are also frustrated that they're not seeing their city move quickly or urgently enough to prioritize safer streets and protect from dangerous driving. This council has actually passed numerous laws to refocus DDOT and efforts to actually achieve the city's Vision Zero goals, but many of them sit unfunded and unimplemented. That's why I was disappointed to see the amended Budget Support Act still does not include the complete subtitle that the Committee on Transportation and the Environment approved that rededicates excess automated traffic enforcement revenue toward funding traffic safety legislation and infrastructure improvements. And I say rededicates because this council already passed a law requiring that money generated by fines for dangerous driving be reinvested in traffic safety improvements. As we know, the mayor proposed striking that law in her proposed BSA, Budget Support Act, and use the ATE revenue to balance the budget, while still leaving key traffic safety legislation unfunded at a time when the district is frankly further away from its Vision Zero goals than when it started 8 years ago. One of the most consistent themes the committee heard during our budget oversight hearing for DDOT was the anger and frustration that residents felt in response to the mayor ignoring the law and instead using ATE funds to balance the budget. Folks were eager to see the impact of directing ATE revenue towards investments that make our streets safer and more accessible. Now, I'll be the first to admit this was a tough budget. Hard decisions had to be made, but dedicating ATE revenue to traffic safety investments struck the correct balance in terms of how the district should approach ATE revenue. We as a government need to be sensitive to the fact that many people believe that traffic cameras are all about revenue instead of serving as a mechanism for providing accountability to people who speed. The fear is that if the goal of traffic cameras is to generate revenue, there's little incentive to design our roads in a way that discourages high speeds or change behavior. Why? Because in that view, more speeding means more revenue. When the mayor added more than 100 new automated traffic enforcement cameras, but then swept away all the new revenue to balance the budget, it underscores the notion that ATE enforcement is about the money and not about safety. One of the few ways that we can combat this narrative is to create a clear nexus between, on the one hand, revenue raised from dangerous driving, and on the other, investments to reduce that dangerous driving. That's the balance the council struck 2 years ago, and it's the balance I hope to restore with this amendment. We also need a much better understanding and transparency around the district's ATE program. Our committee recommended adding additional language this year, requiring the CFO to send us monthly reports on the CFO's latest ATE revenue projections, the methodology employed to generate those projections, the anticipated date by which any excess revenue be deposited into the Vision Zero fund. This is going to allow the council to do rigorous oversight and to push DDOT to make critical investments in our wards and in our communities when it comes in. But we can't make that push if the money is disappearing into the general fund. And I'm grateful that that language has been preserved in the BSA. Mr. Chairman, if I can have 60 more seconds.
Without objection.
However, the amendment today includes an additional requirement. The CFO also report on the amount of actual revenue deposited in the fund for the current fiscal year's way. Actual revenues deposited will have the authorities in our city. So the committee, and especially the public, need to know when that money gets. I want to thank my colleagues that have added their names as co-introducers of this important amendment, Councilmembers Henderson, Lewis George, Nadeau, Fruman, Parker, and Robert White. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move the amendment.
Thank you, Councilmember. Is there discussion on the amendment? Well, I will speak, and let me be clear. I'm not going to be supporting the amendment. I also expect that I will be outvoted, especially since there's 7 members who signed on to the amendment. But I want to explain my position for the record. First, I will say I agree that it is a bad look to use ATE revenue to balance the budget, but this amendment does not really change that dynamic because it speaks to the revenue over the revenue projected in the budget. I do support automated traffic enforcement, ATE, but I do not support over-reliance on ATE. I fear that we will get pushback from our constituents, from residents, once the ATE program is fully expanded. Already I hear complaints about how unfriendly DC has become. This amendment increases our reliance on ATE revenue. This amendment could be a false promise, and I don't mean to spark debate here, but the program is notorious for not meeting its revenue projections. I realize the CFO has certified the revenue projections, but the program is notorious for not meeting its revenue projections. If the program does not raise over $299 million in FY25, it will not provide any, this amendment will not provide any money to Vision Zero. And if it does, it won't be so much as to actually fund Vision Zero. Vision Zero is an important initiative as well as program, as well as policy. And my belief is we should flat out budget it, instead of relying on what I fear may be improbable projections based on a program that may incite a considerable pushback from residents when fully implemented. My last point is that the mayor has shown a desire to sweep this fund. That's why we are here. Not why we are here as a council, but why we are here on this issue, because the mayor swept it this year. And I fear she will be likely to do it again. So my point here was not so much to persuade anybody as to simply state my reasons, my concerns. If there's no further discussion, the vote will be on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
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 Opposed? Please record me as voting no.
Chairman, please record me as voting present.
The amendment is approved. Is there anything further with regard to the Budget Support Act?
Mr. Chairman.
Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thanks to the work of you, your staff, and the Budget Office has gone into preparing this Budget Support Act for our consideration. I wanted to speak directly to a key change that was included in the ANS that I want to make sure that wasn't overlooked regarding the subtitle on the cap on Medicaid managed care payments to hospitals. If folks recall, this cap was originally conceived by the mayor with a very limited carve out for certain hospitals. The Committee on Health advocated for, and the chairman, you funded an enhanced payment rate for 2 years, similar to a carve out, to Children's National Hospital. This was to account for children's wholly different patient population than the district's other hospitals, as our only independent pediatric hospital in the region, and for children's unique staffing model, which, unlike most hospitals, means that Children's directly employs its physicians. These factors meant that the MCO cap disproportionately affected children's such that the cuts in reimbursements for children's made up approximately half of the $11 million in local savings that the OCFO said that this cap would result in. The Department of Healthcare Finance expressed serious concerns with the proposal, and after much deliberation and negotiation with the mayor and Director Turnage, we are removing the temporary enhanced rates for children's and replacing it with two forms of other assistance that we feel like will better support the district's healthcare system. First, children's will receive a one-time $2.1 million grant to support the pediatric services it provides to district residents. Second, the mayor and the Department of Healthcare Finance have agreed to revise the reimbursement methodology for physicians providing services in hospitals. This long-awaited update to the physician reimbursement will not only stabilize Medicaid payments to children's, but it will support physicians across the District of Columbia. This is a big deal. So we are pleased that our work on this subtitle will result in a fairer Medicaid reimbursement model for all of our district physicians and our hospitals. And so, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you. I want to thank your staff. I want to thank the budget office staff as well for our work on this. But I wanted to make sure that we explained what was happening here, so folks didn't think that children's was getting hosed in this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember.
I could have said that more eloquently, but I didn't have those words.
I think you got your point across. I misspoke a moment ago. What is before us now is the amendment nature of a substitute as amended. And that's what we are discussing. Councilmember Louis George.
Chairman, I just had a question. I wanted to see if you could you explain your thinking and conversations around moving the Department of Forensic Sciences back to MPD. I just want to know sort of what negotiations did you work out with the executive on this matter? And what, if any, guarantees did you receive from them that the reality or the appearance of conflict of interest will not taint evidence and taint our ability to bring viable cases?
Nothing is being moved back to MPD. In fact, the mayor had proposed in the budget that crime scene services or crime scene search be moved to MPD. And we reversed that both in the budget and in this BSA.
Okay, I thought there was an update to it as well. But if not, then I'm very happy. Thank you.
Councilmember Parker.
Very briefly, I just wanted to co-sign thanks and appreciations for the amendments for children's. And so shout out to Councilmember Henderson and her leadership. And thank you all for supporting this very important entity in Ward 5 that is not just a Ward 5 hospital, but is serving children across our region, and its satellites are serving children in all parts of our city. And so making sure that we allot it for the relief that Councilmember Henderson alluded to, the $2.1 million grant, the refined payment process will ensure that there aren't service cuts. I also just wanted to acknowledge the contributions to the MedStar Burn Center. Again, thanks to Councilmember Henderson's leadership, that we were able to get through to ensure that the Washington Hospital Center in Ward 5 continues to provide top-notch service to district residents. So thank you.
I appreciate that you're thinking of these as Ward 5 hospitals, Mr. Ward 5 Councilmember Allen.
Well, considering both my children in Ward 6 were born in a Ward 5 hospital, I appreciate the collaboration across the lines. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you and your staff, especially the council's budget office, which works even more overtime budget during our budget season than they do the rest of the year. In particular, I want to thank Jim Budoff and Phelps, Joe Wolf, and the entire staff for all their hard work. I think that there are many elements within this ANS and within the Budget Support Act in general that are supporting a lot of priorities that the Committee on Transportation and the Environment put forward. I think they allow us to be able to take direct action on transportation investments and improvements, on climate, on sustainability. And I really appreciate the work that's gone into that. I think we're making incredible investments with our Sustainable Energy Trust Fund, which is going to really pay dividends for all district residents, but in particular low-income district residents, including a project I'm very excited about, the pilot electrification program taking place in River Terrace and Deanwood neighborhoods in Ward 7. I do want to take just a quick moment, and I might ask for an additional minute, Mr. Chair, just to put my thoughts on the record about the Department of Forensic Sciences. In the Budget Support Act as amended, it reverses the mayor's proposed transfers of the Public Health Lab to DC Health and the Crime Scene Sciences Division MPD. Those transfers would have been very detrimental to the agency and its work. I want to thank you for restoring that today. However, the BSA does before us make one change that I don't agree with, and I want to put that on the record. The Judiciary Committee and then unanimously at the council had passed legislation to make our Department of Forensic Sciences an independent agency just a couple of months ago. The ANS in front of us turns back the clock and makes it subordinate to the mayor once again. I just want to explain why I don't think that's the right course of action and why I think we as a body are going to have to be coming back to this in the future. First, the decision the council made just 6 months ago was taken after years of extensive and thorough oversight over the Department of Forensic Sciences. The agency's years of turmoil have revealed that DFS, not just the director, but the agency itself, improperly understands its role in the criminal justice system, and this is due to the politicization of its work, driven by a push to reduce crime. That's the wrong frame through which to view the agency's mission. DFS is not a so-called crime lab, it's a science lab. The executive's frame of one of public safety, naturally, and it should be, but that frame is distorted when it applies to science. It forces DFS to become uncomfortably close with law enforcement and the prosecution rather than remain neutral and science-based. Through no fault of their own, their work becomes driven by the results based on catching the bad guys. So I just want to remind my colleagues that what led to the agency's downfall. It was absolutely not an isolated director-level decision to change the conclusion in one case analysis, although that did happen. Multiple levels of management incorrectly tied evidence to someone accused of murder, then tried to cover it up. It was an agency-wide shift in the direction I described, systemic mismanagement at all levels, poor quality assurance protocols, little oversight, all of which manifested through one case. Discovery of that impropriety then rippled through the agency, deflating its polished outward appearance and revealing an agency that had inappropriately facilitated a culture of pressure to skirt constitutional requirements it needed to abide by and move the agency more toward the public safety apparatus instead of the lab. More broadly speaking, we as policymakers, we set the vision for those agencies. And I think we can all agree we expect scientists to follow those scientific principles diligently and produce unbiased, reliable, and objective results. Reversing the agency's independence runs counter to that vision, regardless of who the mayor is at the moment, because of this inevitable pull that happens. Second, at the bill's reading, we heard from the president of the Houston Forensic Sciences Center, the gold standard of forensic labs across the country, about what made the Houston Forensic Sciences Center successful. And a big reason was the lab's governing structure, which completely removed it from the politics of public safety. It gave it independent budget authority and required it to work collaboratively with its stakeholders. Making the forensic sciences and public health laboratory independent of the mayor was intentionally structured around that best practice based on years of oversight and consideration of best practices. Lastly, today's proposal to have the agency be subordinate to the mayor doesn't accomplish anything in the near term. The bill which makes DFS independent remains unfunded and subject to appropriations, meaning that today at this moment, DFS is already subordinate agency to the mayor. That would only change if this bill gets funded in future budgets and financial plans. I don't see a compelling reason to reverse that course today. I'm not proposing an amendment, and I know this is an issue you care a lot about, Mr. Chairman. I hope that we continue to work on this going forward. I think it's going to be something we have to, because today's decision, I think, is going to lead us back to where we came from. And so I'm concerned about it. Want to make sure that's on the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember. And yes, we will continue to work on it. The vote is going to be on the budget, on the amendment nature of a substitute as amended. So this isn't the final vote on the bill. That'll come in a minute. So on the amendment nature of a substitute as amended, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? The amendment is approved unanimously. Is there anything further on the Budget Support Act as amended? We'll do a roll call vote on this. Madam Secretary, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Pinto?
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White?
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White?
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen?
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds?
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Freeman.
Yes.
Councilmember Freeman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes.
Yeah.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The bill as amended is approved unanimously on final reading. We'll turn now to emergency legislation. We have the declaration PR 25-267 for the Budget Support Act. I move that declaration. I will explain briefly, and I have no notes in front of me. When we get to the emergency bill itself, I will clear with General Counsel that the emergency bill reflects the amendments that we've just approved with regard to the permanent. There are provisions in the Budget Support Act that we want effective right away. That's why we're doing this as on an emergency basis. Just for the public, emergency doesn't necessarily mean that there's an emergency like a fire. It could just mean that we want it to become effective after a single reading, if the mayor signs it, without it having to undergo congressional review, and the emergency is in effect for only 90 days. There are some provisions that will have earlier effective dates. And so it's not consistent with regard to every subtitle that it's effective as of October 1st. Some of those subtitles, and it says in the subtitle itself, if it has an earlier effective date. And so, for example, I believe the school advance is effective July 1st. That's pretty important so that the schools can open for the next school year. And so this emergency enables that process to take place. I move the declaration, which I said a minute ago I already moved. Is there discussion on the declaration? Madam Secretary, would you call the roll? The vote is on the declaration.
Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Freeman.
Yes.
Councilmember Freeman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. And Councilmember Pinto.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The declaration is approved unanimously. We have the underlying bill, Bill 25-320, fiscal year 2024 Budget Support Emergency Act of 2023. So moved. And my motion includes all of the amendments that were adopted to the permanent bill. So the emergency conforms in that regard to the permanent. Madam General Counsel. Madam Assistant General Counsel. Is that clear enough for
Yeah.
enrollment purposes?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Is there discussion by members? Since the declaration was approved unanimously, we could do a voice vote on the bill itself. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. Before we adjourn, I just want to note that adopting the Budget Support Act is the final step in our actions on the budget, revising the fiscal year 2023 budget and adopting the fiscal year 2024 budgets on this legislation. I'm going to leave something out here, but among the highlights of what we've accomplished within and the 24 and the financial plan, we've added $27.6 million, added 230 permanent supportive housing vouchers, created a dedicated funding stream in future year maintenance. We funded and restructured several initiatives to facilitate downtown recovery. We restored funding cuts related to victims, especially domestic violence, in both fiscal years 23 and 24. We funded 13 bills, including decriminalizing street vendors and the Domestic Workers Employment Rights Act, as well as the expanding access to fertility treatment, which has gone through first reading. We fixed the opioid sweep that had been made by the mayor. We helped Children's Hospital. We provided seed money for the Burn Center. We reestablished 24-hour bus service. We expanded the presumptive disability healthcare benefits for fire and EMS first responders. We restored the baby bonds program, which is a long-term investment in building wealth for those born in poverty. We added $8.5 million to the University of the District of Columbia subsidy. We laid down a marker to fund the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, and much more. I want to thank. So when we did first reading on the budget, I thank those in the Office of Budget and Planning. But with regard to the Budget Support Act, there was a hell of a lot of work that was done by Deborah Fries and her team and the Chief Financial Officer's Office of Revenue Analysis. Did I say something inappropriate? The CFO's Office of Revenue Analysis, who scored each subtitle in the Budget Support Act and probably rescored some of them multiple times. I want to thank my staff, Evan Cash, Blaine Stum, Lakeisha Jordan, Raleigh Lancaster, Bijan Verlin, and Christian Washington, who provided support as we developed the budget and now the Budget Support Act. I want to thank the staff in the Office of the General Counsel who reviewed all of the committee subtitles and all of the members' amendments to the subtitles and all the new subtitles. And I want to give a special thank you to Lauren Mendonça and Dan Golden, who had to put up with me personally. I want to thank our budget office, our budget director, Jen Budoff, and her team. And although some of these folks weren't as involved with the Budget Support Act, some of them were very involved